I'm so crazy, but we're just going green. People think we're so crazy, but we're just going green. People think that we're so crazy, we're just going green. People think that we're so crazy, we're just going green.
And a very good afternoon and welcome to the show, Phuket. This is show number 77, Going Green, Saturday the 15th of June, and the time is 3:12 p.m. Well, today we're talking about being disruptive. We're changing the status quo. We look at the big picture. We're here on Phuket. Positive changes are happening. It's happening as the spotlight shines on our islands, monsoon period warts. We review this week's edition of the Phuket News, for green news of which there is lots. Last week we had World Environment Day, we had Oceans Day, we had visits from Bangkok senators looking at beach problems, and we provide an update on beach cleaning schedules and the green clubs that are popping up around our island. We'll also be looking at a wrap of all the big international green news over the last week, and there has been indeed quite a bit. Bonn in Germany was host to the climate talks this week. We'll be taking a look at what actions are taking place from that. Also on Tuesday, China will introduce carbon trading. That's quite exciting. There was a report released this morning suggesting that the world may be looking at 11 billion people by 2100. That's far in advance of what the original estimates have been. We also follow Bill McKibben, who's the founder of 350.org, trying to maintain the carbon content in the atmosphere below 350 parts per million. If you've been listening over these last couple of weeks and following the green news, you'll have seen that actually the ppm has already gone over 400. And Bill McKibben's been in Australia and did a trip up in the north in Queensland looking at some coal deposits. We talk a little bit about that. And we also summarize the week ahead for what's happening in green. So do stay tuned today. We've got an action-packed show and lots of positive news. Phuket indeed is changing, and hopefully we'll get a bit of sun out there.
This is Going Green with Nick Anthony on Live 89.5.
Thanks for joining show number 77 today on the Going Green show. And we're going to talk about disruption. There was a forum this last week in Oxford in the UK, which is a global gathering of social entrepreneurs and those who help to scale their work. And they took disruption as its theme. This excerpt is taken and written by John Vollins, who's UK-based, and this was just published in the Director magazine. John was saying that the headline message, that the lights are increasingly green for society. They're in fact switching from amber to green for the economy. We've talked a lot about changes that are taking place in the economy. However, he notes, they are still a bright red for the environment. It still seems it's mostly profit over planet. We do see the gradual mainstreaming of social innovation into the wider economy, either through innovative partnerships between major companies and top social entrepreneurs, or by the evolution of social entrepreneurship within companies themselves. But one part of the agenda is still stuck on red, the environment, an area where we normally think green. Who would have imagined that the European Parliament would vote to undermine the emissions trading scheme, such as they did recently? So while I welcome the new Social Progress Index, which has been designed to show how well countries provide for the non-economic needs of their citizens, I fret that there is only one category, that is ecosystem health, which covers the wider environment, although a second, air, water and sanitation, will presumably address air and water quality issues. It will certainly be helpful to rank good and bad countries in terms of a range of progress indicators, but the history of civilizations underscores the uncomfortable fact that the natural environment has turned ugly on us time and time again. One civilization after another has been terminally disrupted by ecosystem collapse, often fueled by climate change. Anyone who read Bill McKibben's searing overview of the new math of climate change will probably wonder why the systemic dysfunctions in our global economy, which the 50 initial nation-states covered by the index conspicuously fail to tackle, don't demand a planet-centered version of the model. As I put it to a key player involved in the index, one could be sublimely happy and healthy while unwittingly aboard the Titanic. It was written by John Vollins and printed this week in Director magazine. Now, I'm going to move to a break in a second, but there is some fresh news just came out, and it's on the Phuket News website. It was just published this morning. How a lost 9th century city was found in Cambodia. It's 1,200 years ago, and it's just been discovered. It's been discovered by archaeologists using revolutionary airborne laser technology, which allow them to go over the jungle canopy using billions of laser pulses. And it allows them to strip back the layers of jungle and see the perfect structures that are there. These are squares, it's a map of the city, and is an incredibly exciting find. And what is interesting is that it's connected by roads, canals, and dikes. And indeed, they can tell that from the imagery they've got that the landscape was completely devoid of vegetation. One theory they're looking at is that the severe environmental impact of deforestation and the dependence on water management led to the demise of that civilization. Perhaps it became too successful to the point of becoming unmanageable. Well, in this afternoon's show, we're talking about disruption, we're talking about changes, and we're talking about positive things that are happening, but it has to happen on a wider basis if we don't head in the same direction. Stay tuned. This is Nick Anthony, Going Green, show number 77.
With the issues that matter to the island, the environment, and the planet, this is Going Green with Nick Anthony on Live 89.5.
And welcome back to the Going Green show number 77, and indeed it is wet out there. If you missed the report earlier, there's a warning, a weather warning coming through for, again, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, with very high winds, 25 to 30 knots, possibly on Tuesday with big swells. I'm just reading up to 2.5 to 3 meters, so very, very big for Phuket. So be careful out there on the roads, use your lights, please do travel slowly, and take care. Today we're talking about disruption, and there was a group last week discussing how disruption, specifically when it comes to the environment, is what's needed. That, in fact, governments generally are failing in the protection of the planet, and as a result, it's coming down to the community. It's coming down to the people that live on this planet that are going to have to take these matters, specifically environmental matters, into their own hands. Well, here on Phuket, we have been actively campaigning for a better future, and we've been campaigning for better protection of the environment. Well, change has been coming, change is coming, and indeed disruption is becoming a real prospect in a very positive way for our small island of less than 500,000 people. Well, it started with a kiss. In this case, it started with a cozy relationship between greedy developers and corrupt officials, who over the last 20 years have sold off as much as 800 acres of what should have been National Park. And with these revelations last year in 2012, there was a subsequent focus from Bangkok on the cause and effect of this degradation of Phuket's parks. And as a result, a different focus has come to bear on Phuket. The spotlight is now on our island, also because our tourists are on the way to becoming 10 million annual, with a big chunk from non-English speaking Chinese and Russian tourists, who with low-priced tours bring the reality of a carrying capacity into the spotlight. There's also now a realization that there are limits to growth. We're an island with limited roads, slowly expanding airport, lack of new hotels, polluted beaches, and diminishing green spaces. Well, firstly, we had China's ambassador last month who told Phuket officials what needed to change. Then this week, we've had a visit from the Minister for Tourism and a delegation who toured Phuket's West Coast beaches, looking at encroachment, beach and water pollution, and other aspects that we are facing here on the West Coast. The delegation then met yesterday with 14 EU ambassadors from Bangkok that discussed a laundry list of issues and problems, highlighted by the tourism minister's selection of Phuket's 13 main problems. And I'll talk about those a little bit after, in the second hour, after 4 o'clock. Local commentator Alan Morrison wrote this week that the mood has changed. The change is coming. Phuket does have a growing number of people who care for its future. The Governor, Vice Governor Jamlaran Tipayang Pongtada, who this week said at a meeting about tuk-tuks and taxis, as he looked at one of the Phuket's mayors and said, "Are you brave enough to fix this problem here? Are you brave enough to change?" We thought it was an inspirational moment. We think the Vice Governor, Phuket born and bred, put in a few words what a lot more people on Phuket are now thinking. Kun Jamlaran, his fellow Phuket Vice Governors, and the Director of Phuket's Katu District, Kun Veer, are just a few among those now pressing for change from the ground up. We've also been working very closely with the Health Ministry and the Energy Ministry and across all levels of Phuket government, and indeed there are now many, many more supporters that are happy to be vocal. From above in Bangkok, the ambassadors, the Minister for Tourism, and others are likewise pressing keenly for change. It's really now or never. So we hope all the community on Phuket will sense the significance of this moment. The mood has changed. On Phuket, the change is coming. Are you brave enough to change? Indeed, it takes the effort of all of us. And in the second hour, I'll be talking about the green clubs and some of the beach cleaning that's going on. A great example, community spirit, groups coming together and really trying hard to personally make a better place for Phuket. It can be done. Stay tuned. Nick Anthony, Going Green, show number 77.
Nick Anthony, caring about your island home. This is Going Green on Live 89.5.
And welcome back. Show number 77. We've been talking about disruptive changes in getting an acceleration of particularly the protection of the natural environment. And I'm sorry, firstly, for those listeners who tuned in last Saturday and I was out of action. I did actually last Saturday want to come on the show and talk to you specifically about a meeting that I had in Bangkok the week before last, and that was with the directors of 7-Eleven up in Bangkok. If you've been following the story here on Phuket, we've been fighting plastic now for about 4 years. And indeed, just over 3 years, I guess, we were able to get an accord signed by the then Phuket governor to effectively put a voluntary ban on plastic bags. There was a great response, I must say, from 95% of retailers. 2 retailers effectively held out. One was Tesco and the other was 7-Eleven. They both were unable to voluntarily stop the use of and the free giving away of plastic bags. So instead, they've taken a different approach, and the island actually all over has now been forced to take a different approach. It's been slower. Today, there is still too many plastic bags being handed out. Today, there's still not enough training. And today, there are still retailers that haven't started a retail sustainability plan. However, the good news is that both Tesco and 7-Eleven have been at the table, and they have both been implementing sustainable retail plans, both a little differently, but there is very positive news. With the meeting with 7-Eleven, we talked specifically about plastic bag reduction and looked at the Kid Tung campaign that 7-Eleven has been running up in Bangkok and now about to launch here in Phuket. They have been doing staff training with all staff on plastic bag minimization. They're trying very hard to eliminate plastic bags for people that certainly buy a small number of items. So they've got staff training, and I did look at the staff training video. There was a lovely introduction where the lady walks into the shop. "Hi, 7-Eleven, welcome," says the guy behind the counter. She says, "I'd like to buy a piece of gum, please," something like that. And he gives her the piece of gum, and he goes through the process. That plastic bags are bad for the environment, that they're one of the causes of flooding, of killing dolphins and dugongs, and they're partially one of the, I guess, warts of climate change. And open consumerization is certainly one of the problems that's pushing us into the situation we are today with climate change. So 7-Eleven very much getting on top of the campaign, educating staff, and slowly but surely starting to change practices. We had a specific discussion on starting a pilot program in Kamala Beach, where we are looking to do recycling stations in front of 7-Eleven shops. Actually, nearly all retail shops in Thailand, very few have bins, Certainly none that I'm aware of have recycling stations. And so 7-Eleven starting here in Phuket, in Kamala Beach, with the first 5 recycling stations, which will be collected by the Orbitor and an environmental group working within the Orbitor in Kamala called NevNet, will be a wonderful thing. The director then turns around and says, Nick, of course you realize we're starting with 5 shops. We have another 7,195 to go. So these are the type of things that are actually happening here on Phuket. There are relatively small changes in the big picture. However, the momentum is pushing these Phuket initiatives into Thailand, and indeed we're starting to see it impacting other places. Just yesterday, SEEK, local NGO that I'm involved with, had completed, which I'd partially written, a document that introduces a sustainability plan to Boracay in the Philippines. And it was presented to local government yesterday, and they are going to implement a sustainable plan. That came from Phuket. It's a very unusual strategy, it's a very unusual way of thinking, and indeed, it is very disruptive, which is exactly what's needed, for the right reasons. This is not disruptive in terms of stopping traffic or holding governments hostage or suggesting maverick ways of getting attention. This is simply one-on-one community action starting at grassroots level, incorporating and working with not only the community but businesses, NGOs, hotels, and very importantly, both local government, Phuket administration government with the governor and the Orbitor, and indeed trying hard to push these initiatives to become a Thai initiative, which is going to require political support at one level or another. And there's also a push to have this same strategy we've devised here in Phuket to an ASEAN level, which would take it to Philippines and Broadway and Burma and Singapore, Malaysia, etc. So very positive news. So small things can lead to big changes. Being disruptive starts on a local basis.
People think I'm so crazy, but we're just going green. People think we're so crazy, but we're just going green. People think that we're so crazy, we're just going green. People think that we're so crazy, we're just going green.
And welcome back. Show number 77 of the Going Green Show. And we've been talking this afternoon about disruptive efforts in changing the degradation of the current cycles that is pushing our environmental problems now to the fore. Our environment is getting destroyed all over, whether it be mangroves, whether it be the oceans, whether it be the mountaintops. And it's taking all of us to be very vigilant and all of us working together. Well, that, of course, was Big Yellow Taxi, that version there by Counting Crows. Excellent song. Paved paradise to put up a parking lot pretty much says it all. Well, every week we look at the Phuket news, which comes out on a Friday afternoon, and we take a look at local news that pertains specifically to sustainability. Phuket's monsoon period, as we've seen this week, is now in full force, with westerly storms bringing ocean trash to our beaches and our island. We are amid a litter and trash crisis, with increasing waste volumes, despite positive change since 2010, specifically on roadside litter reduction. Actually, that alone is probably reducing, we think, the amount of trash on the beaches by as much as 30%. The promotion of Phuket Green Island, with the goals of a sustainable, low-carbon island, strengthened in 2012 as local government, private businesses, and individuals have worked together to reduce, reuse, and recycle. We are facing a crisis of overcapacity and many decades of overexploitation, natural area degradation, and we need to aggressively pursue short and long-term goals to ensure Phuket is sustainable. Local NGO SEEK, and you can take a look at their website, myseek.org. They've been working on an island-wide sustainability plan that will be launched in 2013. One of those responsible for writing that plan is a lady called Kun Nok. She works for SEEK and also for Absolute. And Kun Nok is also the lady that's currently pulling together the Patong Green Club. We're about to set a meeting in Patong probably the week after next and pull everybody together, all the stakeholders, including the mayor and the local hotels, and pull the Patong Green Club together. Well, every week we take a look at the newspaper And we use a model called the Compass from Swedish-based Atkinson Group to plan a sustainable future using what they call indicators or programs that fall under the four corners of a compass. N, North, is for nature, E for economy, S for society, and W for well-being. Now, also Kunnock writes in the newspaper an article called The Thai Eye, looking at some of the environmental issues from a Thai perspective. And in this week's edition of the Phuket News, on page 6, you can see her article in the lifestyle section. She was writing about the World Environment Day last week. She was involved with a promotion in Jung Salon and was talking specifically about the World Environment Day slogan, which is Think, Eat, Save, and Reduce Your Footprint. So do check that out. Now let's start reviewing this week's paper with probably the most important article, and that is looking at North, N for nature. Without a beautiful place, of course, why would anybody travel here from halfway around the world? Well, on page 3, there's an article called On the Beach. The Senate Tourism Committee, led by its president and local senator Tanyarat Achariyachai, flew into Phuket on Wednesday, and they visited the West Coast beaches and made an impassioned plea for better environmental protection. They also made a laundry list on problems and met with EU ambassadors from Bangkok, discussing these issues and looking for supportive solutions. The list that he made included increasing tourism arrivals with poor infrastructure. We've mentioned that indeed the island is going towards 10 million tourists a year. Traffic is log-jamming the island, and current roadworks are debilitating. Now, we do need these new roads, we do need these underpasses and bridges, but the short-term pain is going to continue for at least another 12 months. Point number 3 he makes is that there is no controlling island sustainability strategy. Development occurring everywhere, and it seems there are limited planning. On environmental degradation, specifically on the beaches, they felt that this was a critical issue. There's also environmental degradation in rivers, during the towns, in the towns, and also on the mountains. The 5th point he makes is that there are attacks on the beaches and public land by encroachment. You only have to go down to Surin Beach and take a look at some of the beach restaurants to get an idea of what's happening. Garbage crisis has been mounting, but it appears that here on the island we're starting to get our hands around this problem, and with the introduction of curbside recycling, which should take place this year, that will continue to reduce what is currently a 700-ton per day problem. Probably around 30% of that is currently recycled, most of it relatively loosely and done at source with people called pickers that just take your recycled stuff out of the bin. 7th issue he makes on Phuket is that there is poor quality water, and we note that there's a recent stopping of the beach classification system, and budgets have been pulled that have allowed for West Coast regular water testing. Number 8 he talks about is tourists and residents' safety and security. He questions their safety with the increasing violence over the last 12 months. Number 9, biggest problem for Phuket, rip-offs from tour guides, drivers, touts, and other businesses. We've all faced it, we've all felt it, and we've all paid very high taxi fares for relatively short distances. Number 10, he talks about tour guide quality and education. That's a bigger problem because a lot of the new tourists coming in do not speak English. They're Chinese or Russian, which requires local Thai guides to have Chinese and Russian language training. It's a difficult process and a long process. Number 11, the private sector promotes for profit. The local government should balance with businesses to protect for planet. And lastly, lack of public transport and jet ski problems. All of these a big issue for Phuket, exactly some of the things that we've been talking about with Seek on the Sustainability Plan, and many of these we've been starting already with pilot programs to try to resolve. So good news, we have Bangkok shining the spotlight now on Phuket, and this may help to accelerate some of the changes we've been seeing. Stay tuned. This is Nick Anthony, Going Green, show number 77.
with the issues that matter to the island, the environment, and the planet. This is Going Green with Nick Anthony on Live 89.5.
And welcome back. Show number 77, that indeed was U2 with Even Better Than the Real Thing. And we've been talking about local news and some changes that are taking place. And what we certainly don't want Phuket to be, from an outsider's perspective, is this beautiful picture of everything is perfect, there's never a bit of plastic on the beach, and for tourists to come here and to be disappointed. We're working very hard to make sure that indeed it's actually better here than on the pictures. So that's a difficult thing to do, but indeed there are some changes to try to make that a reality. We're in the middle of talking about the Phuket News, this week's edition, and looking at some local news that's been happening. Indeed, there is a lot of news today, so I'm going to run through this relatively quickly. Firstly, on page 1, talking again about Phuket floods. We saw Patong and Phuket town at a standstill as rains flooded the town areas. And indeed, in some areas, it was almost higher than the roof of some cars. It does highlight the need for better litter management, reducing block drains, reducing plastic, and indeed for everyone who's involved with development to make sure that drainage is carefully and well planned, and indeed that they are maintaining open green spaces, as if you concrete everything, the water has nowhere to go. The beauty of having natural areas, natural grass, natural grounds, is that it helps to seep this excess water into the ground. Page 5, a good article, which is called Heavy Exploitation Angers Eco-Cops in a Tourist Isle Raid. At DMCR, that's the Department of Marine Conservation Resources officials, braved the weather last week to further investigate Koh Kai Nok, which is a beautiful, tiny little island, little speck of a beach in Phang Nga Bay. However, there's now a bunch of restaurants on it. There's 100 chairs. There was until recently a pier, and there was indeed a setup by some tourist boats that had removed the coral around this beautiful little coral atoll just so that their tourists could go airwalking. They would have a compressor, they'd pump air through a helmet, and these tourists could simply just walk around the island, and the coral was in the way, so they removed it. So well done to the DMCR, who, as they say here, are the eco-cops in raiding again Koh Kai Nok and hopefully forcing change. Also, degradation of the environment. On page 6 is an article where an entrepreneur has smashed down the mangroves. In Pak Lok, the Orbitor raided a construction site, found illegal mangrove clearing, confiscated a bulldozer and 7 trucks. Be vigilant and report mangrove degradation. Page 15 talks about the island scene, and there are some pictures there from the World Ocean Day event at the Phuket Aquarium on June the 8th. Looking at East for economy, on page 8 is a very good new little place in Phuket Town called the Juice Raw. It's Phuket Town's first dedicated juice bar. It's on 91 Yawarat Road, and we do recommend you go check it out and say hi to the guys. Society, there's a good article in the lifestyle section on page 2, which is the arts page. Local school teacher from Kajonkiat School, Josh Rojas, uses beach debris in his paintings. He likes to try to save the beach from non-biodegradable trash. The exhibition is on till the 21st of June, and you can check it out at the Rendezvous in Phuket Town. Also on Society, under Education on page 4, Year 8 students at PIA DDS, that's Phuket International Academy and Day School, look at the issues that are important to them. This is a good article. It talks about using the theme Sharing the Planet. Children are taught how understanding how we share the planet empowers us to take action with the future in mind. The kids in the school are focusing on pollution, beaches, recycling, deforestation, marine life, animal welfare, poverty, and gender equality. And indeed, the week before last, I was involved with this very group up in Nanyang Beach, where we did a 300-meter section of the beach, and we classified all of the data under the ICC data cards. And also local news, there's a movie review. I don't even talk about movie reviews on the Going Green show. However, this is After Earth. The story goes that 1,000 years after mankind has fled the Earth for colonies among the stars, Will Smith and his son crash back down to Earth, and the adventure begins. Science fiction terms, it's a disaster. Cumulative effect, not a serious movie, but could have been a real eye-opener and change activist. Looks like this one's not going to be Will Smith's best movie. I haven't checked it out yet, so I will go take a look this week. And lastly, looking at the local news on well-being, talking about beach cleaning. If you go to Facebook and look specifically at the Kamala Green Club, then has their schedule for events and all of the good things that they're doing over there on Kamala Beach with their Green Club. It's the model of what's being rolled out around the island. And next week, on June the 18th, that's Tuesday, at 10 a.m., there will be a cleanup on the Kamala North Canal. That's in front of the Swiss Hotel. That's for Tuesday at 10 a.m. And then next Friday at 9 a.m., I'll be down at the South Klong in front of the temple on the southern end of Kamala Beach at 9 a.m. for another beach clean. So 2 cleanups next week on Kamala Beach. Very good news. Well done, guys. Stay tuned. This is Nick Anthony, listening to Going Green Show.
We have a lot of fun here at Phuket's Live 89.5, but there's one thing that's still deadly serious, and that's the issue of HIV/AIDS. Here in Thailand, there have been 1.1 million adults infected, and the kingdom still has the highest prevalence of the disease in all of Asia. We want you to enjoy yourself whilst you're here on the island, but don't let the pursuit of a good time get in the way of good judgment. You know the rules. Just remember, if it's not on, it's not on. Keeping it real here on Phuket's Live 89.5.
Phuket's Live 89.5.
Your island, your station.
Powered by the Phuket News.
And just before we pop into that next song, I do want to give a big shout out to the crew over in Bangtao and at Laguna, Bangtao Beach. We had a fantastic meeting on Thursday afternoon, held at the Dusit Resort. There was around 20-odd people there, including Dr. Cham Nguyen, who's the country head for the IUCN, who gave an initial presentation opening that meeting. The meeting was specifically to form a Bangtao Green Club, modelling again on what we just discussed at Kamala. And we have the full support now of the Laguna hotels, including Outrigger, including Dusit, Alamanda, and the Sheraton. Very good news. And the surrounding businesses, resorts, beach clubs, and local community will all be involved. Stay tuned over the next few weeks and you'll hear more about that Bangtao Green Club. And if you're in that area and want to get involved, you can always contact us here at the station or go to myseek.org and send an email requesting support or joining clubs through that website. Stay tuned.
Nick Anthony, caring about your island home. This is Going Green on Live 89.5.
And a very good afternoon. Going Green 77, if you haven't been listening so far. We've been talking about disruption and changing the status quo and getting action quicker, particularly when it comes to protection of the environment. Well, this last week in international news, yesterday talks wrapped up in Bonn, which were the climate change talks. These are, of course, the last formal negotiations before the 19th conference of the parties, the COP19. At last year's COP18 summit, which was in Doha in Qatar, negotiators agreed to launch 2 work streams on the scope and structure of a global deal that would require all nations to commit by 2015 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Well, at this meeting in Bonn this week, climate impacts were indeed at the forefront of ministers' minds, as just outside the negotiations and across much of Germany and Central Europe, towns and cities have been hit by a series of devastating floods. Tens of thousands of people have had to leave their homes, and it left at least a dozen dead. This week, the credit rating agency Fitch warned that the damage in Germany alone could cost the insurance industry €3 billion, while the total cost of the flood damage in the country could be as high as €12 billion. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the Atlantic, New York City's mayor this week, Michael Bloomberg, announced a $20 billion plan to protect the city from the threat of future storms made more destructive because of climate change. Such measures will include flood walls, levees and gates, as well as flood-proofing for property owners and hospitals. As diplomats from across the world leave Germany this weekend and look ahead to Poland at the end of the year, NGOs are calling on them to heed these warnings from experts and provide a clear pathway forward to 2020 and help to create the policy certainly needed globally to encourage low-carbon investment. You can find out lots more either by going to myseek.org and follow the links to this week's Going Green radio show. I've got a few articles and some links, or indeed do Google search and check that out. On exciting news this week, on Tuesday, a carbon emissions trading program is starting in Shenzhen. China, along with India and the US, have been the holdouts for an international binding agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So very positive that China is moving now in a better direction. And indeed, even the US have yesterday said that President Obama is going to make an announcement over the next couple of weeks pertaining to climate change. Hopes that he's going to help, again, better protection of the environment, that he's going to support cleaner energy and get tough on carbon emissions. According to the Huffington Post, an article came out following a report showing that the world's population could reach 11 billion by 2100. That represents 800 million more people than was forecast in 2011. Massive. I'm just trying to put my brain around that. Most of that increase comes because birth rates in Africa have not dropped as fast as projected. The fertility decline in Africa has slowed down or stalled to a larger extent than we previously predicted, and as a result, the African population will go up sharply. The UN reported that the population hit 7 billion in October 2011. It's an amazing increase from the mere 5 million people who lived on the planet in 8000 BC, or the 1 billion who were alive in 1805. The huge surge in population is expected to cause megacity populations to further swell, which will worsen environmental problems and overcrowding. Right now, Africa's population stands at 1.1 billion. But that's expected to increase fourfold to 4.2 billion by 2100. The rest of the world is unlikely to see big changes from the past estimates. Europe may see a slight dip in population because it continues to have a below replacement birth rate, meaning more people are dying than being born. The new analysis used a more sophisticated method for estimating life expectancy, updated fertility forecasting methods, and new population data. Amazing. So there we are. The findings suggest that experts should redouble their efforts to curb population growth, particularly in Africa. These new findings show that we need to renew policies such as increasing access to family planning and expanding education for girls to address rapid population growth. Also in international news, there's a good article out of The Guardian about Australian coal. And indeed, Bill McKibben is in Australia right now giving his 350.org discussion and also talking to the Australian government. And one of his colleagues who went with him took a review of the coal ports in Queensland. Specifically, they went up to the town of Gladstone, which is the front line of Australia's coal expansion. They took a charter plane to fly over the developments, and he also interviewed McKibben as part of this trip. The area currently has 2 ports, with 3 more proposed or under construction, and a 4th was recently dumped by the coal company Xstrata. The port area already handles 50 million tons of coal each year, and the new developments could increase that number by 28 million tons, just over 50%. McKibben says that's simply too much for the climate to bear. There's just 6 or 7 places around the world that have such great concentrations of carbon. This part of Australia, northern Queensland, the tar sands of Canada, the Powder River Basin in the US, and unless we can keep that carbon in the ground, there's very little chance of arresting climate change. The last year in climate science has been nothing short of terrifying. In Australia, they saw their angry summer. Records were smashed, floods, fires ravaged the country. And speaking of which, just read this morning in Colorado, the worst start that one again. The worst bushfires on history. Even groups like the World Bank and the IEA are now saying that we're heading for a world of 4 degrees warming or more. Far too much for a safe climate. The math, which is what McKibben's been running around the world telling people about, has in fact become clear. He believes that the science shows that we can only emit globally a certain percentage more of CO2 to stay at or below 2 degrees of global warming. Now, that's a target pretty much agreed by every government in the world. So they've agreed on what the target is. However, they're not doing much about it. The known carbon reserves in Australia make up for 30% of that number. Amazing. So if we're serious about leaving a safe world for our future generations, there really is only one course of action, and that's to leave the coal on the ground. Okay, week ahead, looking at the Bloomberg climate blog, there's an Environment Committee vote in the EU Parliament. That's to boost the price of emission allowances on the EU carbon market. There's also a UN address on ocean acidification this next week. That'll be happening in New York. According to the UN, oceans have become 30% more acidic since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and by 2050, ocean acidity could increase by 150%. Acidification, which is mainly caused by absorption of carbon dioxide by the oceans, has been found to have varying impacts on marine organisms and ecosystems. There's also a Green Business Roundtable on June the 19th. It'll take place in Washington, talking specifically to college and university endowments about the risks associated with their investments in non-sustainable enterprises. So that's about it for international news. Of course, here on the island, keep your eyes open, get involved, and refuse single-use plastic bags, straws, and polystyrene. Reduce your waste, reduce your energy use, and try to reuse what you can, including composting. Do recycle as much then of what's left as possible. Be responsible to Phuket, and be responsible to our planet. Thank you very much for listening to Going Green show today. I do hope you've enjoyed it. So that's it from me, signing out for the afternoon. Take care on the roads, and we'll talk to you next Saturday.